In today's episode, we follow two influencers from Sydney, Australia, who flew to New Zealand, convinced their fitness routines and their follower count had prepared them for one of the most heavily glaciated mountain ranges in the southern hemisphere. The guides on Aoraki could read the situation within 10 minutes of meeting them. What happened on the Linda Glacier 4 days later is something one of those guides describes as the worst expedition of his career, and he had been on the mountain for 19 years when it happened. It was March 12, 2023 at Aoraki Mount Cook National Park on New Zealand's South Island. The peak rose 3,724 meters above the surrounding tussock plains, the highest point in the country, surrounded by glaciers on every flank. The Linda Glacier route was the standard ascent for the upper mountain and the most popular among guided commercial parties. It was also where most of the mountain's amateur fatalities had occurred. The Department of Conservation maintained current condition reports on every route. The Mountain Safety Council published comprehensive guidance on alpine preparation. The Hermitage Hotel at Aoraki Village kept a wall of photographs of climbers who had not come back. The cumulative effect was that no one who climbed Aoraki could honestly claim they had not been warned. They could only claim they had not believed the warnings applied to them. Skye Donovan, 28, and Bryn Carmichael, 26, arrived at Aoraki Village in the second week of March. They had been content collaborators for 4 years, producing fitness, lifestyle, and travel reels under a joint brand they had built to a combined audience of 311,000 followers. The New Zealand expedition had been planned for 8 months and was funded by a combination of brand sponsorships totaling $24,000 and a pre-sale of an alpine training digital course they had begun marketing to their audience 6 weeks before departure. Their climbing background was thin in a way that mapped exactly onto the failure pattern Aoraki guides had documented across 2 decades. Skye had completed a 4-day mountaineering skills course at Mount Hotham and a guided summit of Mount Kosciuszko, which was the highest point in mainland Australia and required no technical equipment. Bryn had done a weekend crevasse rescue intro and 1 guided trip on a New Zealand glacier the previous year. Both spent 5 days a week in a CrossFit gym in Bondi. Both genuinely believed that physical conditioning was the limiting factor on a mountain like Aoraki, and that their conditioning was elite. The alpine training digital course they had pre-sold to their audience was largely composed of gym workouts. The Aoraki summit was the proof of concept. The course launch was scheduled for 2 weeks after their planned return. They booked through Southern Crossing Alpine, a guiding company with a strong record on the mountain. The FEE was $12,800 per person for a 5-day expedition window with a Linda Glacier summit attempt. The company's intake form required documentation of prior climbs, certifications, and a fitness assessment. Skye and Bryn provided everything that was asked for. The form did not require and could not require an honest representation of how the listed climbs compared to the one being attempted. Their assigned lead guide was Tama Matenga, 47, of Ngai Tahu descent, with 19 years guiding on Aoraki and 7 Linda Glacier summits with clients. Tama was known among South Island guides for his calm demeanor and for never raising his voice, 2 qualities that occasionally led inexperienced clients to mistake patience for permissiveness. His secondary guide was Hayden Crawford, 33, who had been guiding for 8 years and had served as a volunteer for Aoraki Alpine Rescue on 6 callouts the previous season. Both men supported families on guiding income. Tama had 3 children, one of whom was in her first year at university in Christchurch. Hayden's partner was pregnant with their first child, and he had taken extra commercial trips that season to build a financial cushion for the leave he would need. The pre-expedition briefing was where Tama recognized what kind of clients he had been assigned. Skye recorded the briefing on a phone propped against a coffee mug. She interrupted twice to ask about specific shots she wanted on the summit, including a particular yoga pose she had planned in collaboration with one of her sponsors. Bryn asked about the descent timeline because they had a flight from Christchurch the day after their planned summit and could not afford a delay. Tama explained that the mountain set the schedule, that summit attempts depended entirely on weather windows and that flexibility was non-negotiable. Skye agreed verbally and then asked again about the yoga pose. Hayden caught Tama's eye across the room. Neither man said anything. They had seen versions of this conversation in every season they had worked. The first acclimatization rotation went up to Plateau Hut at 2,200 meters. The hut sat on a high snow basin below the upper mountain and served as the staging point for Linda Glacier attempts. The walk-in took 6 hours from the helicopter drop point. Skye and Bryn handled the rotation well, reaching the hut on schedule and posting content from the deck within 10 minutes of arrival. The fitness was real. The mountain had not yet asked them anything that fitness could not answer. What Tama observed during the first rotation was different from what Skye and Bryn understood about themselves. Their pace on flat glacier was strong. Their pace on technical terrain, the short rope sections, the crevasse traverses, the steeper ice, was inconsistent. Skye repeatedly stopped to re-rig her camera mount mid-traverse. Bryn struggled with the front-pointing technique on harder ice and compensated with brute leg strength rather than learning the form. Both behaviors were correctable in a longer training window. Neither was correctable inside a 5-day commercial expedition. The second rotation went higher, to a temporary cache point at approximately 2,800 meters on the lower Linda. This was the altitude at which the mountain began to differentiate fit climbers from acclimatized climbers, and where the influencer's lack of high-altitude experience began to show. Skye reported a headache by the time they reached the cache. Bryn's breathing on the steeper sections was rapid and shallow. Both sleeping patterns at Plateau Hut that night were poor. Tama checked their oxygen saturation in the morning. Skye registered 84%. Bryn registered 81%. Both numbers were on the lower edge of acceptable for that altitude after a single rotation. Tama discussed the readings with Hayden, and they agreed to monitor closely without raising the issue with the clients yet. Talking too early about altitude often produced an argumentative response that made the next conversation harder. The weather forecast on day 3 identified a possible summit window 48 hours out, with a backup window approximately 36 hours after that. Tama briefed the clients on both, noting that the first window was tighter and the second was more conservative. He recommended waiting for the second window. Skye objected. Her flight schedule, the course launch, the content calendar, none of it accommodated the longer wait. Bryn supported her. They had paid for a 5-day window. They wanted to use the first window. Tama explained that the first window required a much more aggressive ascent profile and would push their acclimatization harder than was advisable given their saturation readings. Skye responded with a phrase about trusting their bodies and pushing through. Bryn added that they had not flown across the Tasman to play it safe. Tama agreed to the first window. He documented his recommendation in the company's expedition log, including the saturation readings and his stated preference for the second window. Hayden countersigned the entry. The documentation would be relevant later. The summit push began at 1:20 a.m. on day 4. The upper Linda required sustained climbing on increasingly steep ice, with crevasse navigation in the dark and a final push up the summit ridge that had killed climbers in conditions far better than what they were facing. The wind was within the acceptable range. Visibility was good. Tama assessed the conditions and confirmed the go. Skye's pace through the first 3 hours was steady. Bryn fell behind almost immediately, his shallow breathing becoming a wet, productive cough by 4 a.m. that Tama recognized as early-stage pulmonary edema. Hayden checked Bryn's saturation, 73%. Tama recommended an immediate descent and turnaround. Bryn refused. He cited his fitness, his training, his refusal to come this far for nothing. Skye, who was 30 meters ahead and had not heard the conversation in detail, called back to ask why they had stopped. When Bryn explained, she sided with him. They were going to summit. The argument cost them 18 minutes. Hayden took Bryn back at 4:38 a.m. short-roped and on supplemental oxygen, beginning a descent that would take 11 hours and end with Bryn hospitalized in Christchurch with confirmed high-altitude pulmonary edema. He survived. He was also out of the story for what came next. Tama continued upward with Skye. The decision was one Tama later described as the worst he had made in his career. Leaving Skye alone on the mountain was not an option. Bringing her back against her will was not within his authority. Continuing meant climbing into an altitude window where her saturation numbers and her cognitive state were going to deteriorate together. By 7:15 a.m., at approximately 3,400 meters on the upper ridge, Skye's saturation had dropped to 71%. Her speech had become slow. She was making technical errors on rope work that she had executed correctly during the rotations. Tama recommended turnaround for the third time that morning. Skye argued. Tama recommended turnaround for the fourth time. Skye agreed verbally, then took 6 steps upward instead of downward, and Tama realized she was not processing the conversation in real time. He short-roped her. He began the descent. The first 400 meters of descent went as well as could be expected. Then Skye fell. The fall was not the kind that killed her instantly. The slope was steep but not vertical, and Tama's rope arrest worked. What the fall did was twist her left leg in a way that produced an immediate displaced fracture, and what the fracture did was eliminate any possibility of self-rescue. Tama radioed for an emergency helicopter extraction. The weather window was closing earlier than forecast, and the helicopter pilot was already operating at the edge of safe conditions when he received the call. Tama spent the next 4 hours stabilizing Skye on the ridge. Her cerebral function continued to deteriorate. By the time the helicopter reached them, she was unconscious. She was airlifted to Christchurch Hospital and pronounced dead 9 hours later from the combined effects of high-altitude cerebral edema, hypothermia, and complications from the fracture. Tama sustained severe frostbite to 3 toes and a torn rotator cuff from the rope arrest. He underwent surgery in Christchurch the following week. He has since returned to guiding but no longer takes commercial summit clients on Aoraki. The course launch Skye and Bryn had been promoting was quietly canceled. The expedition's documentation, including the saturation readings and Tama's recommendations, became part of an internal review that resulted in revised intake screening procedures for commercial Aoraki expeditions. Tama and Hayden had read the situation correctly within 10 minutes of meeting their clients. They had documented every warning. They had recommended turnaround 4 times in the final morning. They had executed every protocol the situation called for. The mountain still took one of them. The ridge does not care about follower counts. It never has. Thanks for watching. If you like this story, click on the screen.